All right, so we're technically live now. So we can wait a minute or so as people start logging on. So we have people from Facebook, YouTube, my personal page, maybe yours. If you're watching us, please join over onto YouTube or the Goddess Elite Facebook page for comments. That's the easiest way for us to see them and be able to react and answer questions for you. So tonight, very excited to welcome a good friend of mine, Zach. Zach, you're local, so we've actually had you in the store for classes and healing work and all the fancy fun things you do. Yeah. And you actually have a class coming up on Saturday, and we thought it'd be a good idea to help answer questions for people who might be thinking of taking the class and they're not really sure what to expect in the class. Hey, Elizabeth. Hey, Sandy. But feel free, guys, to type in questions in the comments. We'll get them answered for you. Zach is not afraid of answering questions. If anything, you have a lot of knowledge and a lot of stuff that you can answer for people.
Thank you.
So why don't we kind of go over, how did you get into, hoodoo work and that type of stuff that you do?
Oh boy, so I could write a lengthy, at least pamphlet on how.
Short version.
That's probably one of the more common questions I get asked is, how did you start? When did you start? Where did you start? And on my personal page, I think I actually did a video on that, kind of where it began, and I used that as a template for how I think others should begin. So I guess to summarize a lot of this, it started with my grandfather. Growing up half Mexican, you would think I'd have a little bit more predisposition than I already did. Mexicans, there is a stereotype that we're very superstitious, but that stereotype does come from somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it looks more like superstition from outside eyes, but inwardly it's just another part of the culture. It's not weird. For some families, it's weird to sit at the table and talk about seeing your great grandmother telling you, giving you life wisdom, late last night. For other people, it's very everyday talk. But my grandmother was Protestant. My grandfather, although came from, I believe, Presbyterian family, knew more about the traditions in Mexican culture than my grandma. My grandma to this day is very devout Christian, and there's a title in Mexican tradition called oracionista, which is someone who can pray, and just by prayer alone can affect change. If you were to ever tell my grandma that she could do that, even though she very well knows she can do it, you would be met with, she would raise hell herself. That's not real, blah, blah, blah. She would very argumently defend herself. My grandfather knew a lot of the Mexican traditions, egg limpias, cleansing with eggs, using red string for protection. He also was a drummer for powwows, so he knew a lot about Native American protocol and how to smudge properly, and the meaning of the four medicines and what direction they came from, and how to offer tobacco and how to properly use sage and harvest sage and where you should get it. So a lot of it started with my grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
And then, just as I feel every young teen does, I had an interest in Harry Potter. I had an interest in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And of course, that leads down the road. As much as you want to say, the Catholics were wrong, it doesn't make kids want to learn magic. In my case, it did. So, you go looking and you find, traditional witchcraft. You find, you know, and then when you go a little further, you find voodoo, and you know. So just through my own wanderings, meanderings, and musings, I finally came to the practice of voodoo work and conjure. And because now it's more popular, there's so many articles on what it is, and along with that comes a lot of bad information. When I was younger and looking into it, there were so few articles that most of those articles were from real practitioners, and it was easier to find. And some of the websites that I thought still existed, I would type in their URL. The practitioners have taken them down because of bad information and a multitude of reasons, I'm sure. But after finding Hoodoo Work and Conjure and practicing that for a while, I kind of went back. With Hoodoo Work and Conjure, there's a big emphasis on ancestors. And through working with ancestors, I decided, all right, I'm working with my ancestors. Let's go back and see what my ancestral traditions were. So from there, I learned brujeria and parts of curanderismo. The thing with curanderismo is it's not a title that you can give yourself. It is a title that is earned, but it is also a title that the community gives you. And true curanderas and curanderos will never call themselves that. They will never introduce themselves as that.
See, that's interesting because in the shaman path that I work, it's the same thing. Like we don't go around saying I'm a shaman now. You wait for the people around you to start saying that and like giving you that title. So then you know your work is good.
Yeah. That's something that's very common in Central all the way to South America. You don't really see that too much in like the Northern American tribes and Native American communities, because that type of medicine person, there are just so many different names and so many different traditions amongst them that it is a little different. But there are some people who are given a title and they are allowed to use that title, and it's don, D-O-N, and that can mean gifted or it can mean honorable. If we're taking from Spanish and Latin, don, doña means giver or to give something. So they're gifted and they're honorable. So you have like Don Maria Sanchez or Don whatever, or Doña. So there are parts of curanderismo that pretty much anyone can practice and not necessarily be a curandero, and those kind of just flow into the culture. And there are things that you learn from your aunties. There are things that you learn from your grandparents, like cleansings and such, or how to read certain playing decks, like the American playing deck, sometimes the tarot, La Baraja Española, which is the most common deck you're going to find in Mexico and in Latin America. So let's see what else came from here. I've been practicing brujeria and traditional ancestor path for, I want to say 6-7 years, and I've only been offering it for probably about just as long. I believe that's it. That's kind of where it stopped. I do also practice some types of, it's called granny magic, and this is where it gets difficult because there are so many terms that get crossed into each other.
Mm-hmm.
So it's called granny magic in the Appalachian Mountains. When you get more toward like the Pennsylvania area, it's called Brujery, which is a Pennsylvania Dutch practice. There's a difference between the Amish and the Pennsylvania Dutch. A lot of people kind of use those two terms, again, interchangeably. That's not necessarily the case always. I will say 80% of the time that's going to be the case, but not every Dutch person that came over here continued to say that.
Right.
But Brujery, sometimes it's also called Appalachian hoodoo. Hoodoo also has it can mean the practice of African descent as we know it now in the modern age. It can just be a catch-all term for folk magic. Some people say conjure and root work are the old terms, and then conjure and root work are in themselves two different things, even though you can use all three of those terms the same. So there's a lot of like terminology that gets brought up.
Right.
But the source of it came from my grandfather, and then my own journey into my ancestors.
Okay. Now let's remind everybody they can type in some questions, be it about any of the things that Zach has mentioned. Because Zach is offering, you offer classes in the store, teaching or giving basics. Because I know when I've mentioned it and have put it up, there at times have been, I guess if you want to call it kickback, sometimes where there's the question about cultural appropriation. Just offering that to anybody. So I don't know what your feelings are on that. Is it maybe is it sliding on that line, or is it more of to keep the tradition alive and going and the knowledge behind it? Who's ever willing to work it with respect, and the knowledge that it deserves, and not just half-ass, throw around, symbols, deities and, lighting candles without really putting the attention it needs.
Right. Here's the thing with cultural appropriation. It is so nuanced that it really is situation dependent. I don't want to be seen as like a dictionary or some kind of encyclopedia for what cultural appropriation is or is not. I am not the end all be all. Mm-hmm. That being said, because I practice in traditions that aren't European or aren't necessarily always open to practice just by anyone, there are things that I have learned, and there are things that I myself have to make amends for and have to reconcile with, because there is also another misconception that just because you are a person of color, that you cannot appropriate. You can be a person of color and still have appropriation as a problem. And you, especially being a person of color and being an appropriator, should be holding yourself accountable. If we're going to talk about hoodoo work and conjure, it's not appropriation, in my opinion, and I could be wrong about this, like I said. If you are not making some kind of profit, it is fine. If you are making some kind of profit, but also doing the work, both socially and internally, you're fine. If you are creating space for advocacy, you're not appropriating. Appropriation, I feel you start to step the threshold of appropriation when you're doing it for your own physical, financial, and material progression by selling it to other people.
Right.
It's one thing if you're a white person who grew up in the South learning hoodoo work and conjure from elders, and now you offer those services. It's another thing if you just picked up a book written by some white author who had maybe a passing in hoodoo work and conjure and decided that they were good enough to write a book and pass that information on. That's a problem.
Right.
For instance, let's use you as an example. You are a shamanic practitioner. You are white, but you have a respect for that culture. You are learning from a master who learned from the masters of the Peruvian and Andean cultures. And you give space to people of color to help themselves progress. So I don't think what you do is cultural appropriation.
Right. That would be a real big setup just for appropriation.
Now, are there going to be people who disagree with me? Probably. I'll use Santa Muerte as another example. She's open to everyone and anyone, but every culture has a deity of death. And if you're a white person who immediately goes to Santa Muerte without looking into your own heritage, your own ancestry, your own lineage, and saying, maybe I'll have a better chance at talking to one of those deities, you're not necessarily appropriating culture yet, but you're stepping in that direction. That being said, I used to be a devotee of her. I am not so much anymore, and I've passed her on to someone who is white, who has a profound respect for her, who has come to work with her, and she's given the signs that those two working together is a good thing. But he's also someone who, throughout his entire life, has been submerged in Latin culture. I am half Mexican, and I am not fluent in Spanish. This person who's white can speak Spanish millions of times over better than I could, ever. He is not offering services, though. He is not taking up space where people of color should be filling it.
Gotcha. So anybody who might have an interest for, any of your upcoming classes, they would be welcomed in, as long as they're coming in and saying, I have an interest, because like the one that we have coming up is kind of like an intro, answering some questions, what hoodoo is, the crossings, the ethics. So if anybody has questions about hoodoo and crossings or ethics, what they are, how to know the difference, when to apply, feel free to answer or type in questions. Zach will greatly appreciate some answers there. Elizabeth says, my question was about some of your personal protection practices, any that you might care to share when doing your work.
Okay. So personal protection. I work a lot with the saints. I wear medals a lot. My primary medal is Our Lady of Guadalupe, but in our tradition, she's not necessarily Mary. She is Tonantzin, who is an earth goddess. It's also like the name for the culmination of the many earth goddesses that the Nahua and the Mexica, which most people know of as the Aztec, had in their pantheon. I would wear medals that either, in brujeria, things that are blessed by the church are just as powerful as things that are blessed in a more traditional way. So if you can get a medal that is blessed by a priest, wear that. If not, there are ways that you can do it yourself. There is one popular, though I don't know how traditional it is, way to bless the St. Michael medal, and that is to place the St. Michael medal on a white plate, pour Florida water over it, light it on fire, and recite the prayer to St. Michael. When it's done, you would then anoint it with fiery wall of protection oil or St. Michael oil. In brujeria and in curanderismo, there are 3-day, 7-day, 9-day rituals where we'll take the medal, submerge it into a glass of holy water, and recite the prayer appropriate to whatever saint the medal is for. Over that course of days, we'll light a red candle or a white candle for that. In Latin tradition, and I say Latin because this is both in Mexico, this is in Cuba, this is in Puerto Rico, glasses of water are very protective. It's even better if you can add anil, which are indigo bluing balls that are used to be used in laundry to make white garments appear whiter. You can put that in. You can add Florida water to it. You can add camphor to it. You can add alumbre, which is aluminum. I don't know if it's bisulfate. It's some kind of chemical, but it is commonly known as alum, which you can get in the baking section of most grocery stores, or if you go to a Mexican grocer, you can find the actual chunks, which are what I use. You can put that into a glass of water. You can set that behind your front door, behind your bedroom door, in the living room, in the kitchen. A lot of people are familiar with the red thread around the wrist. That most people are familiar with that in the context of Kabbalah. But it is a tradition in Mexico where red string, red cord, red ribbon, whatever, is blessed and then tied around the left wrist. And that is protection from the evil eye. Let's see what other forms of protection. Crosses are used a lot in brujeria. Like I said, metals, the rosary is used a lot. Oils, anointing with oils, not just your forehead, but your forehead, your chest, your hands, the back of your neck, especially the back of your neck, your feet. And then you'll have like family traditions. I know there's one I read where a mother used to keep a picture of Our Lady of Guadalupe by the front door, and under it was a table that had a bowl, and in that bowl there were, I believe, 7 apples. They were stacked, and visitors that would come in would have to pass by the apples. And if that visitor had ill will toward them or ill intent, the apples would turn moldy. So that is another way.
Okay, so excuse me. We have another question from La Luna Sweet. She says, respect and honor all ancestry, history, art, and practice. Where is the balance line in hoodoo, or is that within each practitioner? I think this is a concern for many. Could you please elaborate balance of light and dark, intending no ill will as a whole in common? Like, and I don't know. Feel free to elaborate here if I'm going to say this wrong, La Luna. Hoodoo gets a pretty bad rap, as I believe Voodoo and voodoo. And I just like the tarot, or I'm sorry, like the Ouija board, like we have a lot of 80s and 90s horror movies to thank for bad raps applied to these religions, that they're automatically evil, they're automatically bad, they're dark, they're only meant for harming and cursing. You know, and I'll just say to people who come into the store, if you see those candles burning next to my register for prosperity, that is technically hoodoo root work. You know, and that setup is set for anybody who, you know, gives their change or a blessing. It's reciprocal, so it blesses you back. You know, the workings in this tradition, and I'm sure you can elaborate, Zach, that it's all in the intent of the practitioner. You know, whether or not you're harming or if you're healing. You know, the energy of the energy is, and it's how it's manipulated. It's up to the practitioner to stay in a balance. Because even in the shaman practice, you can use a sickening to heal, you know, to cause something to decay and fall away that would ultimately bring about a positive change. How do you keep yourself, Zach, then kind of like balance your checks and balances for yourself to make sure you're not kind of going way too far? Because you can also be way too far on the happy-go-lucky, love and light, you know, fluffy bunny side too, and not like understand there's a whole other side. In my opinion, anyway.
Like I said, I don't want to come off as some kind of master of this. So what I'm going to tell you is just my personal experience. Being self-aware is something that if you're doing the work spiritually, it's just a natural thing that comes about, is self-awareness and knowing when you're, I guess, drifting to one side or the other. The thing about voodoo, though, is those ethics aren't necessarily always there because they're not needed to be there. Hoodoo came out of a tradition of need, and whatever that need was in the minute, they would do what they had to do to get that need met. There wasn't this line of, is this good? Is this bad? It was, here's the situation and we need to act fast. Whatever's going to help is what we're going to do. There wasn't time to philosophize. There wasn't time to have this measurement of good and evil. It was, right, I can survive. I don't care what this is going to do to the other person. It needs, like, it needs to help me. It's going to help me.
Well, and I think it might be a good point to kind of step back and talk about how hoodoo came to be, how it's the blend of African, Irish, Native American, but I would say more heavily African American.
Yeah.
So what these people had to do to protect themselves, to make sure they could get through, protect their family, what they would maybe have to do to ensure the survival of themselves or their children may not be the greatest thing for that slave owner, but in that moment it was right for them. So if you want to go, if you have a better like quick history, like what is hoodoo? How did it come to be?
So hoodoo, in my understanding, the way it came to be was, I'll preface this by saying there is information out there that kind of takes away from hoodoo's origins. Yes, it is an African practice. Yes, it does have Native American influence. Yes, it does have Jewish influence. Yes, it does have European influence. But a lot of people who are going to tell you that, or a lot of people you're going to find that information from, are authors who are white who don't want to be left out of the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Those traditions do exist in hoodoo, but hoodoo is largely, and when I say largely, I mean 99.99% African. Specifically, the areas that were inhabited by the Fon, the Iwe, basically the same people that brought Santeria and brought Palo with the Congo and brought voodoo to the New World. And that's another thing. For people who are familiar with Wicca and witchcraft, Wicca is a religion, witchcraft is a practice. Voodoo is a religion, hoodoo is a practice. It came with the slaves, it came here, and a lot of the things were different. The things you're going to find in Africa are not the same things you're going to find here. When they came here and did what they had to do magically to get by, they would have to substitute. And so that's where the influence of Native American use of herbs and stones came from. The practice itself stayed intact. The ingredients themselves changed.
Mm-hmm.
But to say that hoodoo is less than African or slightly more of something else takes away from the fact that this was an African tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people, I feel like, again, they don't want to be left out of the conversation. So they add, well, this medicine bag is actually this mojo bag, and this nation sack actually comes from this Native American practice, or this charm bag from traditional witchcraft. You're doing exactly, this is going to offend some people, you're doing exactly what the slave owners did to the Africans, and that was to erase their heritage.
Mm.
Like, if you learn nothing else from the class that I'm going to teach, honor where it came from and have a respect for that. Because if you don't, you're not any better than the masters of that race.
Right. So this isn't something people should be jumping in on for passing, to learn how to do the quick love spell, how to do the quick, money spell. Not all of us, I don't actively do my ancestor work all the time, but then again, I'm also at this point, not saying I'm any better than anybody else, but I can communicate with them without having to have the setup every Monday with the offerings, but I know in some hoodoo traditions, that's what you do. Mm-hmm. You have your altar and it's just for your ancestors. And that's the only thing that goes on there, and you honor it weekly. And at least in the one that I was, studying with, it was Mondays, mm-hmm. And for a while I did it. And then part of me was kind of like, I can talk to them all the time anyway. Grandpa George doesn't care, if I fill that water. It's more of acknowledging when I'm feeling him and listening. but I know it's important for some traditions and some working on a regular basis. Does anybody have any other questions or comments? I think now I'm just trying to like fill in some silence time until people ask questions. So in the meantime, so the upcoming class on Saturday, talking about like crossings. What exactly would crossings be? And should somebody be worried about learning crossings or working with crossings?
Okay, so this is definitely something I'm going to go over during the class, but a crossing, for those of you who don't know, is what we would call, I guess, in the West, those of us who are more familiar with just like magic in general. And when I say magic in general, most of us are going to be familiar with the European practices. It is what you would call a curse. It was called a crossing, or to cross someone up, because you were putting them in a position where they would be similarly to Christ crucified. They would be put through pain. And when you think of cross in this tradition, I don't want you to think of like the T shape or the plus sign shape. It's more of an X shape. In fact, a lot of, especially if you go to plantations, when someone was crossed up, it would be their name or a packet of their belongings or something with some form of cross mark being integrated into them. Now, just because you see a black cross or an X or a cross mark doesn't necessarily mean that it was bad. Mm-hmm. That cross mark also can represent the crossroads. And a portable type of cross mark has been documented. I'm not entirely sure if we would classify it as old rootwork and conjure or more modern hoodoo, but a lot of work is done at the crossroads, and sometimes the crossroads wasn't as easily accessible, so there were things that were created called cross marks, and they were like portable altar, similar to like a vive in voodoo. It would be often in chalk or ash or cornmeal, drawn on the floor. Sometimes it was marked out with 5 pennies or coins, but work was done there. So just because you see a cross mark does not mean that it was necessarily a curse that was being done. When crossing someone, or when talking about crossing someone rather, one of the biggest questions that gets brought up is the idea of karma. That's problematic for a few different reasons. Karma is an Eastern tradition. It is not known by Africans. And when I say that, I don't mean if you went to Africa right now and said karma, that no one would know about it. In the African traditions, the idea that we like to think of as karma was not a philosophical thing in Africa. Second problem with that is what we in the West think of as karma is not what karma really is. The only reason you would have to worry about karma and crossing someone is if you're like me and practice an Eastern tradition such as Sikhism, Jainism, Hinduism, or Buddhism. Otherwise, it's not something that really should be on your radar. I am a Tibetan Buddhist, but I also practice conjure, rootwork, and hoodoo and brujeria, and there are times where I have done crossings. Those two things will conflict with each other. I've come to a reconciliation with those two things. That's not to say everyone else will or should do that.
Mm-hmm.
Crossings also aren't something that you should just do because you're mad at your boyfriend. You absolutely can. There are really no rules when it comes to hoodoo or conjure. You're allowed to do pretty much anything you want, but this is where the ethics comes in. Why are you wasting time on something like that?
Right.
A lot of people will go to hoodoo for love spells. They weren't just doing love spells because they were lonely. In the time of slavery, a woman, especially if she had a child, had a better chance of living and surviving if she had a male significant other, husband, boyfriend, whatever. That love spell was to keep him around so she could survive. It was not just because she was lonely. It was not just because she wanted someone to be there for her. It was because of the difference between life and death.
Elizabeth put in, as you're saying this, she says, ladies, your ex isn't worth the candle wax.
No.
And right on. When people have come in and asked at the store, you know, how do they do a love spell? How do they bring somebody back who's cheated or who left? My answer always, why do you want them back?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm not going to tell you how to do that working, because it's not going to get you anywhere that you need to be. You know, I'm like, no, how about we work on healing the emotional trauma and getting past that? And, you know, and it's not usually the most favorited answer that they get from me, but that's just what it is. You know, but love, money, luck, you know, new job, those are always like the most common things that people are always, you know, looking for. And one thing that in the classes that I had done was always like getting to the root. Here we go, root work, the root of the problem. You know, why are you constantly chasing money? Why are you constantly chasing a job? Do you feel that you don't deserve to be successful? Do you feel that you don't deserve love? Do you have abandonment issues? You know, like Mr. Right could be right in front of you. The candle can bring that Mr. Right. But if you got problems, it's not going to not going to go anywhere for you. So that's one thing, you know, goes back to actually doing the work and the self-reflection and getting your client or the person you're trying to help to really get to the root or the bottom of the cause of the problem. And some people don't want to do it. They want the quick Band-Aid, light the love candle, you know, everything's great and perfect now.
That brings up another point. A lot of people fall to magic as kind of like the quick way out. Magic is not going to fix your life. It is not meant to be a substitute for the work. It is meant to be, and I say this in a respectful way, it is meant to be kind of like a crutch. It is meant to be, I guess, more of a guide. It is not going to bring you a job if you're not putting in applications.
Right. I can't win the lottery if I don't go buy the fucking ticket.
Yeah.
I never do. But yet I bitch about it.
Yeah.
I didn't win.
And the other thing is sometimes it won't work because that's not where you're supposed to be focusing.
Mm-hmm.
You do a spell, this goes for anything hoodoo or otherwise. If you do a spell or a working or a trabajo or anything and it's not working, chances are it's because you're not doing either what you need to be doing work-wise or what you need to be doing internally.
Right.
A no is still an answer.
Just because she doesn't like it. Yeah. Back to a conversation you and I had earlier, you know, rephrasing the question and asking again. This is where I almost can't wait to be that guide on the other side to like flick the person on the back of the head. Like, what did we already tell you? Stop it. Quit rephrasing it and hoping you're going to get a different answer. Quit doing the same candle work, expecting a different outcome. You're just wasting money and, you know, and resources that could be used better elsewhere. So in hoodoo, do you find any animal energies or totems being used?
Yes and no. Animal parts are used and the correlation to that animal are used. Totems, here's the other thing. A lot of people like to throw that word around. That is a Native American word. Totem should stay with natives. There are other words to use when we're talking about spirit guides that are animals. A catch-all phrase that is used in hoodoo when it comes to really anything you can say is a curio. So things like raccoon penis bones are used a lot in love, lust, and sometimes gambling. Not often have I seen that, but I have had conversations with someone very knowledgeable in hoodoo who has talked about them being used. So often it's more of a sex, love, or matchmaking kind of a thing. Actually, I believe there is a tradition. I don't think it's still a practiced tradition where And this occurred in the South amongst white people as well as people of color. If a boy liked a girl, he would tie a raccoon penis bone onto a red thread and give it to her as a necklace. And it was kind of like a love token. I
don't know why that tradition died. Where's our penis bones, damn it?
I think they got switched with diamonds on engagement rings, but
ho hum.
In hoodoo, there is also a practice of bone throwing as a form of divination, and all kinds of animal pieces are used in that. Shells are used, bones are used, of course, that's where it gets its name. Let's see, raccoon penis bone, cowrie shells. Cowrie shells can have a multitude of meanings that I've come across. Anything from money and currency to love to the voice of the ancestors. Like, cowrie shells are almost a catch-all curio, really. Let's see, what else? The different parts of the bones from different animals can be indicative of different things. And they're more self-explanatory than you would probably assume. For instance, a leg bone, you stand on your legs. So foundation, balance, stability, that's what a leg bone would mean. A chicken breastbone, well, that's near the heart. It has to do with love. The wishbone, we all know what a wishbone is for. It's for making wishes. So wishbones in most throwing kits are going to have a meaning somewhere along the lines of the things you wished for, your hopes, your dreams, your aspirations. There's like a neck bone from a chicken. A lot of times, chicken heads and chicken necks were used to make soup for the poor. So that neck bone can represent poverty or the feeling of a loss of something. Cat's eye. Now, cat's eye is a type of shell. It is not like a dried cat. Usually that means luck. There are many different curios that are animal related. Wings, feathers. Feathers are used extensively in hoodoo, curanderismo, and brujeria, especially black ones or white ones. They're almost unanimously used for cleansing.
Okay, so is there like an equivalent in hoodoo for the Malocchio or the evil eye?
Yes. It's just the evil eye. It's not something that is talked about a lot in hoodoo, but because hoodoo does blend certain things, and brujeria and hoodoo, especially in the south of like Texas and the more southern states, those blending of cultures, there's definitely ways to protect and remove malojo, or the evil eye. In Mississippi and in New Orleans, it's not so much talked about. It is a thing that some believe. It's kind of more of a regional belief, depending on where that practitioner is from. I don't know, like an Alabama practitioner who would know more about the evil eye than one closer to like Mexico and Texas. So with that, at least in my research, it's not something very big. It is something that is there, but you're more likely to have to deal with someone dusting where you're walking, or dusting your door handles, or laying gree and mojo bags where you're going to walk and stuff like that.
Much more of a physical than the psychic spiritual working. Yeah. Dreamwork. How would Dreamwork, or is it used in hoodoo working?
With that one, where, like I said, the evil eye is more regional, Dreamwork is more dependent on the practitioner. Some practitioners will interpret Dreamwork. Most are probably going to resort to throwing bones, throwing dominoes or dice, or using cards. Dreamwork is more of a divination technique when it is used in hoodoo root work and conjure. It's not talked about a lot when it is used, just because it's not, what their grandmother taught them or their teacher taught them. That's more of a newer type of divination, I guess. That's not to say that some practitioners won't say, pay attention to your dreams. Your ancestors might talk to you. Pay attention to your dreams. Your guides might talk to you. Pay attention to your dreams after you do this work because your answer might show up.
Right. So Sandy wants to know, what is dusting?
So dusting is where you take different powders, and they can sometimes be just one single type of powder or dirt, or more often they're going to be a mixture of things. And it's where you either dust where someone's going to touch, like a doorknob or a door handle. You dust where they're going to walk, so like their front step.
Like foot track.
I have actually dusted people's clothes before who I didn't want near me with hot foot powder. With hot foot powder, you would actually, the best way to deploy that would be to dust it into their shoes. But I have like gone into work when there was a certain person I didn't like and like threw powder onto their clothing. You have to be careful with that, because if you're using powders that contain things like sulfur, that can be a real legal problem if they get sick and find out you did it. Luckily, the hot powder I used were all things that you can get in your kitchen cabinet and probably have used in barbecues. Dusting is one of many ways that you can deploy magic. But it's really just like what it implies. You dust something with a type of powder, and that powder has an intention, a meaning, a purpose, a use. That person comes into contact with it. That person now has that energy attached to it. There's actually one way you can find out if someone has what's called Buford you, which is where they put graveyard dirt or a combination of things like valerian and other gross things that would otherwise hurt or harm you. And it's practical. It's very practical. There's an old tradition of tying a red string on your ankle with, I believe, 7 knots, 3 knots, and that has a mercury dime. Mercury dimes were pure silver. Silver tarnishes when it comes into contact with sulfur. So if you were to step in powder that was meant to hurt you, you're going to know because that mercury dime is going to change color.
So just voodoo, science helping magic.
Voodoo has a lot of practicality involved in it as well. It's not just causing magical mischief. There is another way that people have caused a sickness that goes by a name that doesn't have a lot of good information, so I'm not going to tell what that working's name is, but it causes actual breathing problems, and that's because sulfur is included in it. So yeah, you're going to get sick by someone dusting you if sulfur is involved and you're inhaling it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and if they're asthmatic, they're going to have issues with about anything.
Yeah.
So there's dusting. What else? There's the foot track, which is just putting things where somebody might walk. Mm-hmm. What could even be, it wouldn't have to just be, a crossing. It could be a healing, if somebody's a little resistant to accepting healing, you could kind of just put it down where they sit, where they walk, where they lay.
Yeah. All in dusting, it's not necessarily, when I described it, it does sound more like a malevolent thing. No, you can do things like, grind up some lavender and some other herbs used in blessing, angelica, and dust your bed sheets with it to give you like a sleep aid. It's a type of sleep aid. Or let's say you suffer from nightmares, if you dust your pillow with that. Of course, keep in mind, you're breathing in powders. You don't want them to be toxic. And you don't want to, if you have a known allergy to crabgrass and stuff, don't go dusting dandelion and chamomile on your pillow.
But the magic will save me.
But you can dust like the bed sheets to help you with sleep and to protect you during sleep. Yeah.
Awesome. So Luna's asking real quick if there is any specific symbolism to a Black Panther in the tradition.
Not in hoodoo. The black cat is a symbol of luck in hoodoo, rootwork, and conjure. Panther does hold a lot of symbolism in brujeria. The panthers, which were also jaguars, technically those are two different species, but or families, I'm not sure. But there were two types of warriors in ancient Mexican culture. You had the eagle warriors and the jaguar warriors. Basically, one was more elite than the other, and both were equally feared though. The panther was tied to a deity known as Tezcatlipoca, who is the obsidian smoking mirror, and he was responsible for almost every catastrophe and disastrous thing that you could think of. The thing with Aztec deities is they did not have all kinds of different deities. And this is true for a lot of Aztlan, which is kind of where the Aztecs came from, and the ancestors of the Uto-Aztecan language family. So you have like the Hopi, the Navajo, and most of northern Mexico. That is the Uto-Aztecan family. They came from a land called Aztlan. And they all have this very similar idea of these aren't gods in the sense of what we think of as a god when we're thinking Roman or Egyptian or Greek deities. They're more like personified or anthropomorphized concepts. So Tezcatlipoca was just a name given to anything that could happen that was disastrous. Bad luck, that's the god of Tezcatlipoca. Thunderstorms that destroy villages and buildings, that was Tezcatlipoca. But it wasn't this one being doing all these things, it was just a concept. It's hard to really describe these kind of things with the limited language English has. It's kind of like if you were to, let's say you've had a really bad day and you're just like, you throw your hands up and you're like, can you please just let it be better? You're not really directing that plea to anyone in particular. You're just wishing for it to be better. That wish and that plea is a concept, not aimed at anything directly. That's kind of similar to the deities in the Mexica pantheon.
Gotcha.
But the panther, the meaning of the panther, it has association with Tezcatlipoca. It can mean courage, it can mean endurance, strength, power. It can also represent mysticism, mystery, magic, things that are unseen, so like the occult. My name based on the calendar. So Aztecs were given names based on when they were born. In the Mexica calendar, my name would be Galiaca, which is breed house. Each date was governed by a deity and also had a nagual. A nagual, think of that as like the avatar of that deity. Mine is Tezcatlipoca. And his avatar, his nagual, is the jaguar, the panther. So you could say that I have a connection with that and that it reflects in what I do. I've been doing magical practices pretty much my entire life, and that's kind of what the jaguar represents. I also am very much a Sagittarius, and you could say that Sagittarian attributes mimic that ferocity of the jaguar, of the panther. You can ask Melissa about that. Do you think I am very much a fire sign?
Well, I think that's why we get along so well. Though, don't let me catch you dust in my clothing. Back up 6 feet in the store.
Yeah.
But it's already almost 9:30. So, again, anybody new coming in, if you have any last minute questions regarding like hoodoo, crossings, the ethics behind it, Zach is a wealth of knowledge, as well as, being able to teach classes, intros on these things, to give better understanding. So if you thought that you might want to dabble, and dabble might not be the right word, but maybe tip your toe, figure out if it's for you, the classes that Zach teach would be a good way to start to get your basics, what would be required, and that basic understanding, so you don't go in there blindly kind of just lighting candles on fire and throwing herbs at it and hoping for the best. Because that's coming up, and we'll do them again. So if you watch this, after the fact, and keep an eye on our calendar, we'll have other classes coming. You also do classes in regards to what was it? The 7 divisions, I believe, was the title of it.
So the African traditional religions, I will be doing that class soonish. I have to solidify some dates, but in that class, I've taught it probably 2 times before, and a lot of people have said, you should repeat this class. I like this class. So I'm going to repeat the class. Basically, it is just a crash course into, I don't know if I'm going to get them all. It's Santeria, Voodoo, Ifa, Maria Leonza, pretty much all of the African traditional religions I'll touch on. Sanse. I will also talk a little bit about how Espiritismo and Taino beliefs kind of blended in there, but 21 division as well. But it's really just like an overview of each of those religions and kind of what makes them different from each other, since they all do have their roots and origins in Africa. I am not an initiate or practitioner of any of those religions, but so I wouldn't ask me certain questions, but I do know quite a few practitioners of those religions that if you really were interested in learning more or possibly even starting initiation, I could give you contact. But that class is, again, more of just like tipping in, seeing what it's about, learning a little bit of the basics.
Mm-hmm.
Keep in mind, there are certain things that I won't tell you, because even though I know the answer to a question you might have, it is not my place as a non-initiate to give that answer.
Well, it's out of respect to the religion and those who have put the time and effort into studying. Yeah. But that being said, rest assured, if anybody's worried, like if they come to the Hoodoo Crossic and Nothing class, which will be online, so you can take it from home, because COVID is just sucking the fun out of everything in person right now. It's only $15, but you don't have to worry about like, oh no, I've been initiated into something and I don't understand it. There will be no initiation, no pouring of all the waters over your head or anything of that nature. Zach is not going to tell you who has your head in any of these classes.
I don't even have the power to tell you that.
So it's just to learn some basics and maybe find out, is this an interest of yours? Can you, put good interest and work and time and development into it? Or if it was just like, this is really interesting, but it's not for me, at least not right now. $15 for the Saturday's class. It's about an hour and a half, 2 hours, depending on questions and whatnot. But because you are local, hopefully at some point we'll be able to have you back in doing some of your healing and cleansing work. I think that is so close and personal. Like there's no way of doing that right now with COVID. Maybe we should like hex COVID. Like, how do we get rid of COVID?
I feel like trying to do that is just like those TikTok witches who tried cursing the moon.
I had somebody come into the store and ask me what I thought of that. And I'm like, what? Because I'm not on TikTok. And I'm like, what are you talking about?
That is a whole other rant that I could go off on.
I'm like, maybe I'm showing my age. Like, what are you young whippersnappers doing on these other little apps? What are you fucking talking about? And then my gut impression, and maybe it's just my bias. And it was just like, it's young people looking for attention. And I'm not going to go look for it and get involved and stir the pot and get wrapped up in it.
Oh, I'll stir the pot.
You are the stirrer of pots.
Yeah, I will straight and tell them, you're stupid, this isn't working, you're dumb, and here's A, B, and C, Y.
Like, I'm going to let you go, fuck up over there. And when you learn your lesson, you want to come back and be like, man, that was stupid. And this is why, then we'll have a conversation. But other than that, I have no time for that. Go do your mess up over there. Yeah. I have shit that I'm working on. I'm like that grumpy old lady, that grumpy old spiritual lady. I don't have the patience for it. This is what I teach.
I think you've been doing this so long. You just become so jaded and annoyed at certain things.
I don't have time.
Yeah.
That's why I direct them to like you or other people. Like, go ask him.
I can yell at them.
You get the most interesting people from me. You All right. So with that, if you have anything like, do you have a website for anybody that maybe wants to get in touch with you? Email?
Get in touch with me. So my email is, actually, if you go to my Facebook, don't go to my Facebook, go to Facebook, type in Red Cloth White Candle Brujeria, Brujeria. So there's that. And I have not used that email in so long. I believe it is rcwcbrujo@gmail.com. But if you go to Facebook and type in Red Cloth White Candle Brujeria, it'll take you to the Facebook page. And in the contact part, there is my phone number, I believe, as well as my email.
Because you're able to do some, private client work, possibly.
Distance-wise, I can do readings and I can do workings if that's something you're interested in, or if the reading says that's not a bad thing to do. As for cleansings, I don't do distance cleansings. I don't think they're a thing. I don't think they work. If I'm going to do a cleansing, it's going to be in person. But due to COVID, it's not a possibility. There are, of course, suggestions I can give to you on how to do certain things yourself. I am all for personal empowerment. Along with personal empowerment, I wanted to mention this. Melissa brought up initiation. If you don't take my class, be careful of taking other classes that say you're going to be initiated into hoodoo. There is no such thing as being initiated into hoodoo. There is such a thing as being initiated into voodoo or the other religions, but hoodoo is a magical practice. It is a folk magical practice. There is no initiation involved. It is simply the learning, picking up, and practicing.
Ta-da! All the information. All right, guys. So I typed in the red cloth white candle brujeria, so you can find Zach on Facebook. Hopefully, we'll be able to have him in soon. But with that, because it's like 9:30, I'm an old lady and I need to eat dinner. I think we will wrap this up, but I'm sure we can get Zach to come on and talk about other topics or just ask. I think sometimes people wouldn't mind just having a few of us practitioners and just be able to ask random questions and pick our brains. And that can be fun and interesting at times. And then hearing like all of our different, like similar yet different answers for things, because we've all had different experiences doing it.
Yeah.
That could be fun just for us. And, screw the audience. We're having fun. All right, guys. So until next time, thank you for joining us and hanging out. And we'll see everybody later.